The vehicle was doing routine work. That is the part people forget. This was not an expedition. Nobody was hunting for anything. A remotely operated vehicle was descending through the water column on an industrial job, the way hundreds of them do every day, in a part of the ocean where the only reason anyone has eyes at all is that there is oil underneath. It went past 1,000 feet, past 2,000, past 3,700, where there has been no sunlight for a very long time, and the only illumination in the world is the 2 lamps bolted to the front of the machine. And then something came into the frame. It was pale. It was enormous. It had no head, no eyes, no fins, no tail, and no discernible front or back. It billowed. It folded in on itself and opened again, and across its surface there was a pattern, a fine, regular, geometric mesh, like netting, running over the whole thing. Then it turned itself inside out. The footage got out, and for weeks the internet lost its mind over it. Not a whale, not a wreck, not a plastic bag, though half the people who saw it insisted that is exactly what it was. The leading theory among serious commenters was that it was a placenta, from a whale. It was not a placenta. What it actually was is stranger than the guesses, still not fully understood, and it has something living inside it. Something red and alive and present in almost every one of these animals anyone has ever filmed, and nobody can tell you for certain why. Once you know what that thing in the frame is, the deep ocean stops being a place on a map. Start with where this happened, because the location does most of the work. Sunlight in seawater does not fade gradually. It gets stripped by depth, color by color. Red is gone in the first few tens of meters, then orange, then yellow, then green. By 200 meters you are in a blue so thin it barely counts, and by 1,000 feet down there is effectively nothing. Below that is what oceanographers call the midnight zone. No light, ever. Not dim. None. The temperature settles at a few degrees above freezing and stays there. The pressure at 4,000 feet is over 100 times what you are sitting in right now, which is enough to collapse a sealed steel container and enough to kill an unprotected human being instantly. And here is the number that should reset your sense of proportion. That environment, dark, cold, high-pressure open water, is the largest living space on this planet. Not the largest ocean habitat. The largest habitat, full stop. Everything on land, every forest and grassland and city, is a thin film on the outside of a rock. The volume where life actually happens is mostly deep water, and it is enormous. We have seen a fraction of it. Not a small percentage, a fraction of a percentage. More of the surface of Mars has been imaged in detail than the floor of our own ocean. So how do we see anything down there at all? 2 ways, and both are compromised. The old way is a net. You drag a trawl through deep water, and you pull up whatever it catches. That is how most deep-sea species were first described, and it works fine for things with bones and shells. It is catastrophic for anything soft. A gelatinous animal that hits a net at towing speed does not arrive as a specimen. It arrives as slime in the bottom of a bucket. Generations of biologists knew there were large, soft-bodied animals down there, mainly from the wreckage of them. The new way is a machine with lights and a camera on a cable. A remotely operated vehicle. Science ships have them. So does the offshore energy industry, in large numbers, on inspection and maintenance work. Which produces a peculiar situation. Some of the best deep-sea footage in existence was not shot by scientists. It was shot by industrial cameras doing something else entirely, and it exists because somebody on a support vessel happened to be watching the monitor. So, April 2012, Gulf of Mexico, an ROV working near a drilling site, roughly a mile down. The clip that escaped is about a minute long, and it is genuinely difficult to watch without your brain trying to force it into a category. The animal fills the frame. Pale, whitish pink, translucent enough that the lamps go through it. It has volume. It is clearly not a flat sheet, but the shape will not hold still. It billows open like a parachute catching air, collapses, folds, opens somewhere else. And over the whole surface is that mesh. A regular network of fine lines, hexagonal in places, running across the body like wire netting laid over a balloon. Then, at the end, it inverts. The whole animal turns inside out, which is not something a viewer's pattern recognition has any file for. The video went viral, and the theories arrived immediately. A plastic bag, said the largest group, which is not an unreasonable first guess, and is also a fairly damning comment on what we have put in the ocean. An alien, a parachute, a shroud, a used condom, which was said often enough to be worth mentioning, and the theory that dominated the comment sections and then leaked into the press, a whale placenta. That one had a certain appeal. It explained the size, the pallor, the tissue-like texture, the way it moved. It also could not survive 10 seconds of contact with anyone who works in deep water, because the deep sea is starving. Almost nothing grows down there. No sunlight means no plants, no primary production. Essentially, everything alive at depth is waiting for food to fall from above, and when a large piece of anything organic arrives, it is found and consumed with a speed that would surprise you. A large mass of fresh tissue does not drift serenely down a mile of water column and arrive intact. It gets eaten on the way. Whatever was in that frame was not a piece of something else. It was an animal, and it was alive, and marine biologists said so almost immediately. The identification came fast, from jellyfish specialists who recognized the mesh. The animal is a scyphozoan, a true jellyfish. The genus is Deepstaria, and the name is a small piece of history in itself. It comes from the Deep Star 4000, a deep submersible built in the 1960s and associated with Jacques Cousteau's operation, which spent years carrying researchers down to depths that were, at that point, essentially unvisited. In October 1966, on one of those dives, in the San Diego Trough, at a depth of around 720 meters, a team aboard Deep Star collected something none of them had a name for. They tried to bring it up with the submersible's suction sampler, and it did not fully work, because the animal was too big to take in one piece. What they got back was partial. It was described the following year and given a name that is close to an admission of defeat: Deepstaria enigmatica, the enigmatic one, from the Deep Star. A second species, Deepstaria reticulum, was described in the 1980s, reticulum, for that net. And the consensus on the Gulf of Mexico video is that the animal in it was reticulum rather than enigmatica. Here is what the animal actually is, structurally, and this is where it stops being a jellyfish in the sense you are picturing. Take the mental image of a jellyfish, a domed bell, a fringe of stinging tentacles, a bundle of trailing arms. Now delete the tentacles. Deepstaria does not have them. What it has instead is bell. Enormous, thin, and open at the bottom, a sheet of tissue forming a bag that can open more than a meter across, with an opening at the base and no trailing gear at all. The mesh on the surface is the plumbing. Ordinary jellyfish have radial canals running out from the stomach like spokes on a wheel to distribute nutrients. In Deepstaria, that system is not spokes. It is a net, an interconnected geometric web of canals covering the entire bell, which is what one of the original 1960s observers compared to wire netting, and it is the feature that lets a specialist identify the animal from a shaky video in seconds. If a mile-deep camera catching something nobody could name is the kind of thing that keeps you watching, subscribe. This channel goes where the light stops. Now, what that bag is for. An animal with no stinging tentacles has a problem. It still has to eat. The working understanding is that the bell is not a body, it is the trap. The animal hangs in the water column with the bag open, and this is the part that is easy to miss from the viral footage, because in that footage the animal is not behaving normally at all. In an undisturbed state, Deepstaria is not billowing and thrashing. It hangs, quietly, in the shape of an upside-down bucket, and waits. Something swims into the opening. The bell closes around it. For a long time that was inference, a reasonable reading of the anatomy. Then it was filmed. In November 2017, a research ROV named Hercules was working near San Benedicto Island, off the Pacific coast of Mexico, carrying an extremely low-light camera, specifically chosen so the vehicle could film without blinding everything in front of it. A deep styria drifted into the frame. Not collected, not hunted. It simply came past. The team followed it for about 10 minutes. An enormous amount of time by the standards of an animal this rarely seen intact. The individual was on the order of 2 feet across. And on camera, it closed. The bell shut in a fast ripple, running around the margin and sealing the bag. The researchers' interpretation was that the animal had registered the vibration and turbulence of the vehicle as something worth catching and tried to bag the ROV. Think about what that means for the earlier video. Everything that made the 2012 clip look like a creature in distress, the billowing, the folding, the inversion, was very likely the animal being blown around by the ROV's own thrusters. The machine filming it was generating the water movement that made it look monstrous. The most viewed deep-sea footage of this animal is essentially a recording of an animal being harassed by the camera, and nobody at the time knew that is what they were watching. There is a second thing the Hercules dives caught, on the seafloor, that almost nobody talks about. A dead deep styria on the bottom, with deep-sea crabs on it, eating. Scientists have a term for this class of event: a fall. A whale fall is the famous one. A carcass hits the bottom in a food-poor environment and becomes a feast that can support a community for years. This was the first scientific record of the same event for one of these jellyfish, which tells you what the animal's ending looks like. It drifts in the dark for however long it lives, catching whatever wanders in, and then it dies and sinks, and things with claws find it in the mud. Now the part that genuinely unsettles people who watch this footage carefully. Go back to almost any decent video of a deep styria and look inside the bell. There is something in there. A compact, dense mass, usually bright red or reddish-orange, sitting inside the transparent body. It is not an organ. It is not the animal's stomach. It is not prey being digested. It is a separate living animal. It is an isopod, a crustacean, in the same broad group as the woodlouse in your garden, except this one lives inside a jellyfish 1,000 meters down, bright red, which at that depth is functionally invisible because there is no red light down there for it to reflect. And these are found together constantly. Deep styria filmed without a resident isopod is the exception, not the rule. Different oceans, different depths, different species of the jelly, and there is the passenger, sitting inside the bell. Now here is the honest state of the science. Nobody can tell you with confidence what that relationship is. It might be shelter. The inside of a large jelly is a hiding place, and there is very little hiding available in open water at depth. It might be transport. The isopod does not have to swim if it lives inside something that drifts. It might be feeding. The isopod may be eating scraps of what the bell catches, or eating the bell itself, slowly, in which case it is a parasite riding around inside its own food. It might be some exchange that benefits both, with the isopod cleaning the jelly of things it cannot remove itself. All four are on the table. There is no consensus. And take a second to sit with what that means practically. To settle it, you would need to observe the pair over time, or dissect a specimen with the passenger intact. But the jelly is so fragile that catching it destroys it. The 1960s attempt tore it. Nets liquefy it. It is an animal that essentially cannot be brought to a laboratory in one piece. So the relationship between one of the largest soft-bodied predators in the deep ocean and the creature that lives inside almost every individual of it is, as of right now, an open question with 4 competing answers and no way to run the experiment. And that is not the only open file. It is one of many, and the list is longer than most people would guess for an animal that has been on television. We do not have a reliable answer for how long they live. We do not have a solid population estimate, not a rough one. There is no way to count a transparent animal spread through the largest habitat on Earth. We do not fully know what they eat. The mechanism is understood in outline, the bag closes, but the actual diet, in the wild, over a life, is not established. And the distribution is genuinely confusing. These animals have been recorded in very cold southern waters and in the Gulf of Mexico and in the Pacific off Mexico and in the Central Pacific, which is either an enormous range for one poorly known animal, or a sign that we are lumping together things that should be separated, or simply what happens when your entire dataset is a few dozen chance encounters spread across 60 years. Since the 1960s, the number of scientific papers dealing with the enigmatic species specifically is somewhere around a dozen. A dozen. For an animal a meter across. Let that land for a moment. Because this is not a suppressed subject. There is no agency sitting on the data. There is no restricted footage. The reason we know almost nothing about it is duller and considerably more uncomfortable than a cover-up. It lives in the dark, it is the consistency of wet tissue paper, we cannot catch it without ruining it, and going to look costs tens of thousands of dollars a day for a ship. So the record is what it is, a handful of specimens from the 60s and 80s, some chance encounters by research vehicles, and a viral clip from an oil rig that most of the people who saw it thought was garbage. That last one is worth holding on to. The single most watched piece of footage of this animal in existence was captured by accident, by an industrial camera, on a job that had nothing to do with biology. That is not an anomaly in deep-sea science. That is closer to the norm. Which brings the whole thing to an awkward place. We are currently in the opening phase of an industrial expansion into deep water. Not just oil and gas, which has been down there for decades. Mining. The seafloor holds metals that the battery and electronics industries want badly, and the machinery to take them is being built and tested now. And the argument against moving fast is not sentimental. It is a data argument. To assess damage, you need a baseline. And for the deep ocean, there mostly is not one. You cannot say a population dropped if you never had a number. You cannot say a species was lost if it was never described. When your entire knowledge of a meter-wide predator amounts to a dozen papers and some accidental video, you are not in a position to notice its absence. So there is a real dilemma, and both sides of it are serious. Go and look properly, at scale, and you need money that follows industrial interest, because that is where deep water budgets come from. The best cameras keep ending up down there attached to somebody's commercial operation. Do not look, and the extraction goes ahead anyway, into an environment we have described a fraction of a percent of, and whatever is lost quietly, because nobody was counting. There is no clean answer here. There is only the question of whether we would rather find out now, or find out later from the gap in the record. The vehicle in that 2012 video finished its shift. That is the ending, and it is the right one. The animal drifted out of frame. The ROV went back to whatever it had been sent down to inspect, and a mile of black water closed over both of them. Somebody kept the clip. Somebody put it online. Millions of people argued about whether it was a placenta. And an animal that had been formally described in the 1960s, sitting in the scientific literature the whole time under a name that literally means the enigma, became briefly the most famous unknown thing on the internet, and then stopped being famous and went back to being unknown. It is still down there. Right now, as you are watching this, there are an unknown number of them hanging in the dark across the world's oceans with their bags open, waiting, each one almost certainly carrying a small red passenger that we cannot fully explain. Every photograph you have ever seen of the ocean is accurate. The water really is that color from the deck of a boat. The light really does do that at sunset over open water. The picture just stops at about 200 meters, where the last of the blue gives out. And everything below that line, the largest living space on this planet, and the animals in it that we have met a dozen times in 60 years, is the part no camera was ever pointed at until somebody needed to inspect a pipe. So here is what I want to know from you. If it were your call and your budget, do you send vehicles down now to describe what is there before the mining machinery arrives, knowing you will only ever catalog a sliver of it? Or do you accept that the deep ocean is going to be worked before it is understood, and spend the money protecting what we already know is down there? Tell me which one you would fund, in the comments. I read every one. And if this one stayed with you, the next video is about what a camera recorded on the seafloor that moved when nothing was supposed to be moving. Watch it before the lights go out.